Well, welcome back to the Warp Talk podcast. It has been too long once again, so long, in fact, that I have grown a beard since the last one. Um, we have another guest. The success of our last guest was fabulous, so we are doing it again. Bruce, we have been up in Manchester a couple of weeks ago, have we not?
Yeah, well, we were. Matt and I, and indeed our guest, were in the Northern Warps Conference, the excellent Northern Warps Conference, which was in Manchester on the 4th of July. Whilst the Americans were busy celebrating independence, I think we were busy celebrating a marvelous conference put together by the iNetworks team. And we met up with our next guest there, and Matt and I thought it was too good an opportunity not to ask Ben to join us for a podcast. So Ben is with us today, and I'm going to say that actually we've known Ben for quite a while. He was a chair of information security for London. So mentioning Manchester, mentioning London, other regions are available. And then he's gone off to do lots of other things. And we are going to sort of circle in a bit today on incident response. But I'm going to just pop over to Ben, and maybe Ben, if you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about some of the things that you're up to these days,
Sure.
as well as being at the Manchester conference.
Yeah. So thank you. So when was it we all met? Many, many moons ago, whilst I was up with Lambeth Council, the London Borough of Lambeth, and we were introducing the various standards around GCSX and PSN, and all the fun of that was. It was great. It was great discovering the ISfL community, first as a peer, and then, as you say, later on taking on that chair position. And I was really struck by how the community of each of us back in the day then, cybersecurity was not on the lips of many boards, many senior management people. Were not aware of these challenges that we see coming around as regular pieces of news now. Were thankfully not nearly as common back then. I was really enjoying that collaborative work spirit that we had at ISfL, where it seemed like all of the London boroughs were coming together with our specialists to share the knowledge, share the best ways to document positions, share policies, share procedures, so that should the worst happen, we could work with each other. I think as we get into the topic of today, incident response, that's one of the bits that I think is important, to have a shared network of trusted people. You can just phone up and bounce ideas off, because when you're under the cosh, when things are not going well, when it's a bad day, and it is a Friday afternoon we're recording this, and it's Fridays when these things tend to come about, it's great to have someone else who can provide you with that reassuring tone, sometimes challenging tone. Have you thought of this? Have you thought of that? Because they are stressful times and they are tricky. And that's largely what I've done since I moved out of the public sector and towards the commercial sector. I've moved to a role now where I've been coordinating incident response for a major consultancy firm for 5, 6, I think it's 7 years now. Ooh, time flies.
This is good stuff, Ben. I think also I'm just going to sort of give you a nudge in terms of some of the other things that I believe you might be involved in as, what can we call them? Constructive extracurricular activities. I don't know if you want to sort of plug a few things there as well. As you're on the podcast, you may as well. I'm on other podcasts. People get to plug their books and stuff, so off you go.
I'm not plugging any books. I'm not getting published just yet, although there is an author by my name who keeps on popping up on my Google alerts. And for anyone who hasn't got Google alerts set up against their own name, it's a good way to find out if one of the services you use is breached. We can talk about that more later, potentially. But yes, I'm a big supporter of that collaborative way of working. And part of what I've stuck to was OWASP since I left the public sector. And I've been working with OWASP Manchester as the local chapter many, many years now. So I've been working with OWASP and the OWASP Manchester chapter for a good number of years now. I work as a chapter leader. We coordinate meetings for the local chapter. And just before I met up with you guys at that Northern Warp conference, we'd just done a Capture the Flag the night before, which was a fascinating thing to see. A bunch of people from the technical side of all sorts of organizations come together, work through a Capture the Flag scenario. For points, we were giving away a couple of prizes on the night, and see the ingenuity of some of the solutions. And most encouraging, seeing the diversity of people who are coming through from various backgrounds. Some are at university, some have left university, some have no particular interest in going to university, some are working in the field, some are not in the field. And I think that's one of the things that we need more and more in cybersecurity and good IT, is people who don't necessarily have the regimented background, but recognize how people use computers more. And I think this is one of the bits where AI can massively improve how we do things, because we don't necessarily have to put people through 3 or 4 years of a university degree. No offense to my ex-lecturers, can be a bit dry at times. We can get people who can leverage a lot of the knowledge through AI to provide that sort of business analyst role in many instances. Should they be kernel programmers? Probably not without a university degree or a very good gifted background in microarchitectures. But there's plenty of other roles around that where I think one of the problems we have for cybersecurity is getting it to fit the use cases. And when we introduce security controls that don't fit the use case as well, we shouldn't be overly surprised that users try and find creative ways to keep us on our toes, that work around them, but may introduce unknown risks that we've not thought about and therefore wrong control.
So do you get much local gov representation at those OWASP events? And if not, is there? Do you think we should be pushing that?
I think we get some coming across from public sector as a whole, but we don't get an awful lot. There's a few familiar faces that I see at these things, but not as many as I would like to see. And I think, there's a call to arms there, that there are many opportunities for people in the local government who want to look at how you can use the systems better, quicker, more effectively, by both coming to OWASP events, by coming to local B-sides type events to look at security. There's all sorts, and I believe there is a project that's spun out from OWASP, which provides an up-to-date calendar of all the free cybery type events across the country. We can find that and share the details along with the podcast link later on. That would be good.
I think it would be. Yeah.
There's loads of things that people can get involved with. And again, the wider diversity of viewpoints we get into these systems, the better we can make them.
Yeah, that sounds really good. I mean, I'm guessing a quick visit to the OWASP website may bring up some of those events, would it?
Yes. So if you go through the OWASP website, there is a calendar of events on there. There's also obviously the list of projects. Most people know OWASP for the top 10, but they've expanded that massively. There are cheat sheets on how to set guidelines and guardrails for AI processors. There's a brilliant new project that was presented at Manchester recently around developing applications that have disability considerations built in from the start, and many things in there which I'd not thought about. People talking about how to develop software bill of materials, SBOM, in a really effective way. There's all sorts of things which are incredibly smart, cutting edge in many instances for their field. They need a bit of thought for some of them in order to get set up. OWASP Top 10 is the most mature project, quite considerably. But things like OWASP Zap offer some great tools for testers to be trying out things, understanding the weaknesses. And ultimately, I think the guidance there is you can wait till the end and get commercial pen test, or through your development process, if you're testing as you go, you can understand what the attacks are against your application. And it's really important to understand those attacks. Before we get onto our actual topic, once you release an app, these things are going to be attacked. There's people out there attacking things every single minute of every day. And quite literally, there was a Dutch researcher who released a paper in March. He put a honeypot system, something designed to entice attackers along and see what they did You put this system onto the internet, and it was a brand new system, IP address that you'd never used before. You put it there. And within a minute, you'd had 2 people just trying to gain access to it. As you
Yep.
left it running, there was hundreds of thousands of attacks against this thing. And it just was ongoing. That little flashing from your internet router in the background when nothing in your house is turned on, that's mostly bad people trying to do bad stuff. So if you don't find these flaws, someone else will. Bruce.
Yep. I was just going to say we will get on to incident response shortly, but just to pick up on that sort of point, it's never going to be peaceful in cyberspace. A small district council in the south of England reported dropping 500 scans over a 15-minute interval, and that was in relation to the Tarragon project. So I just thought I'd get that plug in. But it's exactly that, Ben. This stuff is relentless, and just to sort of segue us into the sort of the main event today, it is that non-stop testing, and sometimes quite aggressively testing sort of those external surfaces that could in fact lead us into some kind of incident which might require some incident response. So if we just play that out a little bit in terms of some of the things that could involve, and then we can maybe get some context and dig a little bit deeper into some of these things. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about maybe the data. Who has it? Is it supply chain? Is it you? When was it backed up? How good are the backups? When did you last test them? Do you have an up-to-date network diagram? PII impacted? Then we think about some of the hardware. Has something failed? What's going on there? Are you still exposed? Before your head of IT, bless them, runs around pulling all the cables out, or all the cables and network ports labeled. That's a good one to do in the summer when it's nice and hot outside. Pop into the data center and get that done, particularly if you've still got some on-site stuff. The beautiful one from forensics, time sync. Is your time sync actually syncing? Absolutely essential for pulling together sort of, forensic records of what happened. And then there's the people. What should somebody do if they are impacted by not ransomware, but an incident? And you've called up some kind of incident response. What can you do to prep for the incident response people? What about your teams? Emails, telephony, all of those things. This is a very rich area, Ben, and we're going to lean into your coordination experience and say, look, there's lots of things we can talk about. Let's go with, you've just realized you've had a bad day. What really should people be doing even before they maybe get in contact with an incident responder? Maybe we should mention the MHCLG incident response thing. So that might be a good place to start. But what should people be thinking about even before maybe you hear from them? So before they're on the phone to you, what kind of things should be in place from some of those things, or things I might even have missed? Any thoughts on that, Ben?
Just before you start, can I make a guess and say that the first thing that happens is panic? I mean, surely it's human
Surely
nature.
not.
It's human nature, isn't it? Something happens, you panic. I guess it's how quickly you get over that is the thing, isn't it?
There's a fair part of that. If someone walks up behind you with a balloon and suddenly pops a pin into it, you panic. Not because you can't deal with a sudden loud bang, but because it's unexpected. And that's what incident response is. And they are by nature deviations from the norm. And often telling people I can provide great services which will get you back onto a position where you are in that calm state relatively quickly. But it's still going to be quite painful. You still go through that personal stress at the start, where your heart rate goes up. You're not necessarily thinking. It's the fight or flight sort of response. And a big part of my role is trying to talk with clients, understand the impact, recognize it's not the end of the world, that we can figure ways forwards. Yes, it's serious. It's important. But very similar to the way that our colleagues in the blue light services are able to respond. Taking a step back from it, recognizing prompt, correct action is more important than panicked reaction. and documenting your process is crucial. So I think one of the first things is problem shared is problem halved. Don't try and Superman these things. The minute you start thinking, this feels like there's something which is an external trigger that's done this, there's a malicious entity that's triggered this sort of activity. That's, I think, one of my key points to start going, yeah, I need to tell someone else about this so we can start forming an incident response team that can work on this. Because from what we've seen, when people try to, as I describe it, Superman an incident and resolve it all by themselves, there's just so much going on, so much that you want to document, so many different threads of activity. You've got compliance aspects, you've got reporting aspects, you've got the impact aspects. What regulators do you need to contact? How do you communicate? How do you understand the impact in the first instance? How bad is this? There's a lot of things that need to be done, and we need to get to a point very much like the aviation industry has, where there is a no blame culture. The expectation is clear communications, the recognition that we can all learn from these sort of things. And so from that, we can talk about, yes, you want all of your diagrams, your documentation in a good way. You come across a little bit lectury, a little bit preachy at times. What we want to do is to get people to a position where they recognize, okay, this is bad, this has happened, but we can work through it. There's nothing that can't be solved with this. This is a cyber incident. Let's not make it worse. What are the priorities around this? Which groups of people are going to be most impacted by this? And for the public sector, these are often groups of people who are out. They're members of the public. We have a duty of care to them and their data, and we have to prioritize those systems between that to understand which ones are likely to put them at risk and how do we want to maintain that we're expressing that duty of care. What can we do to support them indirectly? Because there's going to be thousands of people impacted by these sort of things. So we're talking about ongoing aspects around potentially offering them identity support, identity fraud protections, giving them advice around how they can make sure their data is secure, fraud prevention advice, how to reduce the chance of people making use of the data against vulnerable people. There's all sorts of knock-on impacts outside of the technical realm, which we usually, as cybersecurity professionals, we tend to jump straight into that side at first. There are many other aspects we need to consider.
That sounds a little bit like, just to replay that, Ben, and I think it's a very good point, which is, having some of those, having an assumption, having an anticipation that, this could be happening to your organization. What is our plan? Dare I say, exercising that, maybe putting that time aside, maybe revisiting those comms plans, particularly in, the local government space where the stakeholders are the public, as well as, the local business community, et cetera, all of those things. I think it's probably worthwhile having a tested incident response plan. You made some really good points, and I think I'm just trying to sort of encapsulate that into sort of almost a sort of checklist for people listening, which is, do we have one of these? When did we last test it? What did we learn? And do we need to go through that again because it was X years ago? And or with a lot of councils aren't going to thank me for this, but with the local government reorganisation going on, is it worth getting those incident plans tested as early as possible as new organizations form? Because if I was an attacker, dare I say, I'd be looking maybe at this process to potentially attack councils, because things might not be as tight and as focused technically as perhaps they might. So maybe a good option could be to get these plans set up early, ready, as the new councils begin to form.
Yeah, I think good points there, Bruce. First off, having a plan always works better than not having a plan. It's a remarkable thing that despite all of the years and years of effort and development in areas such as surgery, there's a book, Checklist Manifesto, I think it is, Atul Gawade. And one of the observations they made was that in surgery, globally, they work very hard to reduce surgical complications and things like that. But they introduced an idea where there is one member of staff in the operating theatre who has a checklist, and they write down every single implement, every single bit of gauze, etc., that's used during a surgery practice, and they tick them in and tick them out, very much like the double column accounting that you do for financials. And by doing that alone, with a piece of A4 paper and a pen, they were able to reduce surgical complications by double digits globally. This wasn't something about the Western versus the developing world. It was just a consistent, brilliant bit of practice, and such a simple one. But the fact that that was able to do things which millions of pounds worth of investment in hospitals elsewhere wasn't able to do more effectively shows the power of just an aide-memoire to go through, and a practice process that you're used to, as you say, exercising incidents, running through it. Does that plan still apply when we've changed some of our processes, some of our people, some of our buildings will have changed through the local government reorganisation? It's worth running through them. For any organisation, it's always good to exercise these things. If you know that you can do it, then you're more confident in doing it because you understand the side effects, the impacts, and everything else. To go through it as the organisations are changing is also important. And this, strangely, may be one of the bits where the public sector, which usually is quite static organisationally, may be able to learn from the private sector, where mergers and acquisitions are reasonably common. Maybe bits where there's an opportunity for learning to take from that, but absolutely exercising these things, speaking to NCSC as exercising services that can support you, and going through those, making sure things are up to date as things change, because we do see threat actors leverage the opportunities for change as times of uncertainty. Nation states attack other nation states at times of change of regime change, and whether that's a regime change through a democratic process or through a more forceful process, these things happen because they are trying to exploit that uncertainty.
And I think some of those plans may in fact begin to, or perhaps should, cover off some of the things that we sort of mentioned, like, where is the data and who has it. I think those things, if they are in the plans, would have been not necessarily pre-dealt with, but at the time the incident plan was written and tested, our data was here, our data was there, the backup was here, the keys to the backup effectively are there. That's probably going to also, I think, incorporate things like network diagrams into that. We did our incident response plan last year, so the network looked like this. Okay, C and D have changed, much like mergers and acquisitions. Bits of networks change. So it's possibly never going to be up to date, but at least you've got a timed copy. And if you've revisited the plan, it shouldn't be too far out of date, if not pretty much up to date. And also, I think some of the technical controls in there can be checked. If you're going to exercise this, you could say to the tech teams, when was the last time you checked the NTP server? I was aware of an organization recently that, they were using a physical device that was probably a couple of decades old, and the electronics gave up and kind of nobody really noticed until they lost part of their infrastructure. So these things can fall into that plan, be tested and maybe revisited, and, things updated. So I think we've covered off some of the things already, really. Again, like labels in the data center. Some of those things should be, appendices to that plan, and if they're tested and exercised, the question can be asked and assurances can be given, and then you've got a point in time where at this point in time it was like this, so we just perhaps need to get the delta ready for when we start talking to an incident responder. I think that I think that falls into that planning component, really.
I think there's a fair bit around that, and you can go so far in your preparation. It's absolutely crucial to have some plan together, but you also have to recognise that your plan is a point in time, and the organisation will have moved forwards. If you wrote the plan yesterday, most organisations have a volume of change that's ongoing constantly, and it will be slightly out of date tomorrow. Slightly. And it's how far we allow those to drift out. And yeah, those organisational changes are crucial. Having go bags, having a few things together, having in there a few biros, a couple of pads of A4 paper, anticipating these things won't be available, having work with your civil contingencies, planning groups so that they know where there's just supplies of water for your office staff. We've all just been through an intense heat wave. How long could you work? And you're going to be asking people to work excessive hours at points through this. It can be a really hard slog to get through an incident. Again, a reason to not try and Superman it by yourself. You're going to have to pass things on. You're going to have to make sure you've got contingency processes. How are you going to get food and water to your staff at times when potentially your caterer isn't getting paid because of the incident? How do we manage these? And you can go so far with going down to the local supermarket and getting stuff, but having a plan and having some cash available, important things. You're right, network diagrams are always changing, always evolving, but the actual applications and how the data flows through those, that's often fairly static. We're not changing the application every other day. Understanding which of those applications has the priority. What's this got? It's important data. It's important data about the organization. Is it regulated? Is it going to trigger us to need to make an external reporting, such as the PII, such as the financial information? Are we going to have to report that out and go through the process to understand how many people have been impacted? What categories of data are as a result of this? If we can get to a point where you can confidently answer those questions on any given day at the drop of a hat, you're in a far better position to be able to react when it is a bad day and the hat is on fire.
Can I just circle back a second there, Ben, and look at business continuity plans, but more specifically the exercising. The plans themselves get covered quite a lot in walk meetings and by walk members. Not so much the exercising. I kind of get the distinct impression that the exercising doesn't happen so much, maybe, as the work on the plans themselves. I mean, do you think there are any particular barriers to organisations actually exercising their business continuity plans?
I think there's the obvious first one of just being able to get a group of the appropriate people together, and that diary scheduling challenge. That's an ongoing one. I think it's really important to recognise that regardless of what level of people you have together, an incident's going to happen when an incident's going to happen. So whether you don't have all of your team leads available, whether you've got a bunch of people off-site at a training course, or someone's taking their Friday off because they've got a compressed working week, it doesn't honestly matter. Just exercising is the thing to do. Like yourself, Matt, I'm into photography. What's the best camera? It's the one that you've got at the time. And that's the incident team you're going to have to work with when you have the matter that comes up. And it will not be at a convenient time. To only have the opportunity to fix things because you've got your A team available is building fragility into your system. We want the resilience. We want that confidence and strength.
Yeah, I mean, people, have holidays. People become sick. People are people. Yeah, I fully agree with that. And also, it gives the opportunity, in terms of the exercising, for people who might not be involved to get involved, which I think is also useful in terms of spreading sort of organisational knowledge, really. And I've seen a number of successful incident rehearsals, for want of a better phrase, where people have done these not all over one day. They've perhaps done, 2 hours each morning of the week, but with different groups of people. So it rolls through various stages of the plan.
Yeah.
So I think there's more ways of doing this than perhaps we need to get everybody, all of the A team in a room at the same point in time, because that's just not a real world scenario. And also the other thing I think perhaps doing it in segments builds in is that there is going to be this flow of people through the incident because we're humans and we need to go to sleep. So it isn't going to be the A team involved with this for the 15 days that the incident goes on, or the 20 days. People are going to appear and disappear in and out of that team over the passage of time. So there is that. How do you synchronize that? How do you make sure nothing's lost? I think that, doing an incident planning scenario over a couple of days can work on that basis as well.
Yeah, and it's absolutely valid. CIR providers have to figure out how you're going to do your shift change, how you're going to pass on the pertinent information to the next shift. If you're working with a CIR provider and you've got something established, it's sometimes worth having a chat as to how is that going to work across yourself and across your own supply chain. It can take a good while to transfer data, if we're talking at volume, out of an organization. We haven't seen it yet, but I can easily imagine an attacker deciding to do DDoS type attacks against an organization specifically in the future to start challenging those responses. And if you're finding your pipe is saturated with some form of denial of service attack, whilst you're trying to engage with an external party, it's going to make it harder. To, again, use the TV analogies, either Nightmare, where the bell tolled and they stopped at the end of every episode, but to stop and reflect as to where you are on the incident, where the exercise is going. Take 5 minutes out of your scenario and your injects to discuss where it is and the challenges, and then move on with the incident as though it were in real time. Or to have it like the 24 and Jack Bauer, and have it step across to different areas. And we have delivered exercises where at not quite the same, but very similar overlapping times, we can test silver and gold response, basically in adjacent rooms by moving the focus around. And there are many aspects where you have to be making decisions in parallel at bronze, silver, and gold incident command levels. And there has to be that trust for it to be a perfect incident response, probably very optimistic. But there has to be a trust that those structures are going to work and people are going to be able to function without having others staring over their shoulder. And that's another good aspect for why you don't necessarily want everyone who you would have as the perfect A-team available, to have deputies standing up, to have people acting down in some instances to a job that they may have done previously, and people stepping a little out of their comfort zone is a very realistic aspect, and the human aspect and the stress that applies. As an incident wears on, I can't overstate how important it is to look after yourselves and your co-responders, because you do get to a point where it is challenging to remember everything you've gone through. You need to have extensive notes. You need to have support for yourself to make sure that you're taking the time out to go and sleep and to eat and such, and look after yourself so that you can respond in a better way than the attacker can.
And I suppose, in terms of exercising, it really doesn't matter what stage you're at in your business continuity planning, is it? Because I mean, you can only learn and fill in those gaps by exercising. So why not just do it? It doesn't matter where you are. Just do an exercise, take the learnings from that, build it into the business continuity plan, and do it all over again.
Yeah. I think it's very much like the Buddhist notion of it's a practice. It's not about the destination. It's about going through it. Again, the more often you want to exercise it, the more challenging scheduling can become. But if you have those planned out, if you recognize that you can take an incident that otherwise perhaps would have been handled as a smaller thing, take the opportunity that someone's reporting in a password that they need to get changed and do a review onto it, write it all up as though it were an incident, and allow that as the Chaos Army set of tools that you can use for testing cloud and SaaS type instances. Allow that to sort of determine what your incoming incidents are. A reasonable way to come out and look at what your what attack vectors are going to work against you can be to look at what's happened to your peer group outside, look at what's happening on your own help desk, what are the most common things that happen, and exercise the most common ones sometimes. So you've got them to such an efficiency that it's the weird ones that you can then spend the time to focus on. And the common ones, it's just, let's put that in a box over here, that's fine, we know how to deal with that. But this one we need to put our attention on to. That's a valid approach. You can learn from each of them.
Yeah, I also think there's a value in someone keeping notes that is independent from this particular process. And if there is the luxury available of that person not even being part of your organization, a sort of, a critical friend of the organization, I don't know how you find them, but they are out there. It's possible that, someone like the LGA could help to have, I'm thinking of the LGA processes and the 360s. There might be somebody out there who could fulfill that role, come in, take notes, do the journaling, and then feedback what they thought, because they're not part of the organization that is going through the exercise. So there might be something which everyone thinks is completely normal, but the person doing the journaling and taking the notes is thinking, this is a bit strange and wacky, and can make a little margin note just to sort of challenge that maybe at the end. So I think there's a value there for that. So even, if you can't get your A team, at least make sure you get almost the A team and someone who can, do that journaling, keep those notes, and maybe just might be external to the organization that can, come up with a supportive challenge here and there at the end of the exercise. I think that will, that has a value as well.
A trusted friend who can give a little bit of professional skepticism, look over these sort of things, can be a shared learning opportunity between a couple of organizations as well. And there may be a reluctance to get external organizations in, but in the public sector, you do have that benefit that you're not competing quite the same way. And if you can share the knowledge, share the lessons that come out of these sort of things, it can help everyone to improve. And ultimately, that's the bit that matters. The stuff we're seeing around the local government and the reorganisations that are likely to come in soon, there is going to be a need for a lot of shared knowledge. There's going to be opportunities where things inevitably will fall through the cracks, as change at that scale is going to cause those sort of things. If your neighbouring authority that you know you're likely to be merging with takes the opportunity to look in on one of your exercises so that you both have a mutual understanding as to how things work, that sounds like a step towards resilience to me.
It certainly does. And also perhaps looking at that from the other point of view, if you were looking to disrupt local government services and be a nuisance, isn't LGR the ideal time to do it when things are being, split asunder and rejoined somewhere else and people aren't all in the right place and everything else? So I think that ups the need for a bit of exercising in those organizations and potentially the new organization. And maybe that's something to think about fairly early doors. I know there's going to be 10,000 other things to do, but, here is 10,001, and this one is important because there will be people who potentially have done things a different way in the organizations they've come from. So, you could almost use this as a team building exercise, dare I say, get everyone together and have a really bad day and just understand how that might work with all the different teams and all the different people and all the different architectures and things that you're trying to, make into a new council.
It's certainly true that after going through an incident, we do see management structures, organizations that have worked together during the incident. You coalesce through that adversity and you do form quite close bonds with some of the people who you've effectively been in the trenches with when you've worked through an incident. And if there is a way to take a negative situation and get some lessons learned from it, get some opportunities to go, actually this process that you had was better than the one that we previously had. We're going to adopt that and pick best of breed for what we go forwards with. again, seems like a positive outcome.
And you mentioned peers. I mean, do you think having a good mutual aid framework in place with other organisations in your sector is a good thing to have?
Broadly, yes. It is one of the big differences that you have across the public sector versus the private sector. I think it's something that you can leverage. Whilst the NHS trusts are set up to support different geographical areas, they largely provide the same function, and councils are a very similar representative. It's important to recognise this is not about whoever it is paying their council tax and whether they feel represented. This is about having two organisations that happen to do basically the same task, learning from each other and going, what is the better way to do it? This is separate to part of that. That executive reorganisation is inevitably going to have some ripples. And as Bruce said, it is likely to be a time where the hostile nation states are going to be knocking on the door a little more loudly than perhaps they have been historically. And they will probe, they will try their luck, see what happens, send out a few emails that look like it's from the CEO from the new organization. They'll be very well worded using the finest AI prompts that they can manage to get together. Of course, it's very easy to use fine AI prompts when you're running it on a stolen credit card. It's part of the chain of criminality that we see. They'll be using that and throwing out emails that have great urgency implied. They'll be abusing domain typo squatting type things to look like it's coming from a domain that looks like the new organization may be, and leveraging all of that change in order to try and get someone to click the wrong thing by just getting them to disengage the brain by putting that little bit more pressure onto them, hoping that they will click something that give away the keys to the kingdom.
Yeah, and it's funny actually because one of the Bruce and I were fortunate enough to hear about the recent exercise that Plymouth carried out, and I thought one of the interesting things that we heard about there was that MHCLG got involved because they have their CIR service, but on top of that, they are willing if you want their help, they are willing to offer their support if you want to run an exercise, which was really interesting.
Yeah, between MHCLG, obviously NCSC has had their exercise in a box, and there are many organisations which are willing to help and support. And I think it's worth thinking about which are the crucial business partners, and certainly reaching out to the likes of your local NHS trusts, seeing if there's representatives from any significant government bodies that may be in your geographical area, any large universities, any large schools, and see if they're interested. Because we have seen incidents from one fall across through the increasingly permeable membranes that we have these days of cross-working practices into others. And those are going to be the organisations where if a council is struggling, they're going to be reaching out for certain aspects of support and to get that consistency, to know who to phone. Would you know who to phone in the MHCLG in order to access that service when you actually need to? And who would know who to phone on that? How far down the chain is it appropriate for that to happen? What actions would you expect someone to do? You don't really want your help desk team lead to be phoning MHCLG and declaring an incident with the National Crime Authority getting involved and all that sort of stuff. But at the same point, and to our resilience points earlier, we don't want it to be just your Section 151 officer and CEO who knows how to access the service should something go wrong.
I mean, in terms of, the bad day at the office, it all hits the fan. People panic. People get through the panic and try to start sorting things out. What we find in our regional warps, and you will know this, Ben, is that peer organizations will start to panic too when the word gets out. And of course, that's when warps come into their own. But of course, we do see there's an expectation to share information, um, but it can be difficult. We've seen issues in the past where um, some organisations have struggled in the case in the event of an incident. Um, Invariably, we're talking about a crime scene. They're not told not to share. They're told to keep quiet. But of course, within the Warp families, there's kind of an expectation to just say, just keep an eye on XYZ and make sure you've got ABC locked down and just keep it nice and light. I mean, do you see that sharing being an issue?
Yes, yes. Maintaining that flow of information, the indicators of compromise, as we term them, the hash values of the malware that have been detected, the IP addresses that are out there and are being used as part of an attack. It is really tricky. It's really easy to misattribute things and jump to conclusions. The cloud has made this an absolute nightmare at times in terms of public IP addresses being reused. And the attacker, be it a commercially organized crime syndicate, or be it a hostile nation state, again, once they've stolen a credit card, they can just buy a public IP address from any of the major providers, and there's very little to stop them in the majority of cases. It's not as if you can just put blocks against Microsoft or Amazon's IP list, because you'll lose half your services. So, specific to sharing, it's who do you share with? How do you coordinate that release? And Bruce will be able to talk a little to this around his Project Tarragon work. How do you confirm that you're sharing the right information, and you're not going to send out a message that tells everyone to be terribly afraid of 127.0.0.1. And
My favorite.
no place like home.
Absolutely. I didn't want to do that joke.
We can do worse. If you start over classifying these things, if you lock them up so tightly, then it becomes something that may be useful from an academic point of view. Looking back at the incident, you described it earlier on, Matt, as a crime scene. It is a crime scene. The difference is, in many cyber incidents, the crime hasn't finished. The crime may well be going on to the next victim as we speak. And if sharing that description of the attacker means that you can prevent that crime from hitting another organization, all the better in my mind. There is a flip side of it, that with sharing information, there is often a desire to pull up the drawbridge. I believe there's some MOUs around that is expected behavior. And I go back and forth on this as to whether it's the appropriate one. We had a good discussion with the chaps up at the Scottish Cyber Coordination Centre around this, actually. If you pull up the drawbridge, it means you can't communicate with your partner organisations. So the services that you normally would offer are down, the ones that have a reliance. It's also true to say that if an attacker is going to go to the position where they're dropping a malware, using the encryptors they're executing against your organisation, they're not going to do that before they've swam upstream to another body. They're going to be looking around on your network for a good while before they set off the bombs. And if you are just dropping the connections to your partner organizations after you've heard the loud bangs, that's probably a week, sometimes a month too late. They have already been in the network for a while looking around and exfiltrating information. So whilst I get the position, I can't really say I personally support it, because it feels like it's just looking after yourself and clutching on terribly carefully to it, and ultimately leading to a bit of a false sense of security.
I'm also aware of having spoken to a few people, a few threat actors to do with specific situations, that they are then also capable of maybe shape shifting a little bit and, changing their attack anyway. If you're getting information out about the attack to others and people start making, specific sets of changes because they've got some of the IOCs, then, a lot of these threat actors are quite capable. What can we call them? I mean, they're quite capable computer people. They can script, they know things, they have attack tools, they have AI, they have stolen credit cards. Money is no option to mount that attack. They can shapeshift a little. I'm not altogether convinced that we got to the number of ransomware groups, with each of those groups being a brand new entity starting from scratch. I think a lot of them morph. It will be the same people in 2 or 3, and the TTPs that they've got will move. And if they become aware they're being picked up, spotted, then they'll just modify their behavior as well. So I think, to answer your question, Matt, I think it's a fine line between getting information out, particularly to your trusted colleagues within the UK public sector, and the warps are the way to do that because they are regional peer groups. But I think sometimes it hasn't got to be that specific. It hasn't got to be, 127001. It hasn't got to be as specific as that. It can be an attack. I do remember where someone just said, check the way your suppliers log into your infrastructure. That was enough. So we went off and checked, and that particular night we shut everything off because we didn't have time to check everything. And then we rechecked which suppliers had access, how we controlled that access. Was it just a generic name like company name at domain name, or was it specific named accounts? Were they MFA? Were they this? Were they that? Was it always on? If it was always on, why did we give them always on? And just that very simple check the way your suppliers access your infrastructure was enough. That's all you need. It's a little snippet. It hasn't got to be, 300 IP addresses and 27 hash values. That's lovely, but actually it can be simpler. It could be, you might want to drop this, you might want to consider that. It can just be a very simple sentence, which I think sometimes is all that's needed for organizations, just to go off and, probably let the technical folks do technical stuff for an evening over maybe an emergency pizza. I mean, it's working late, so pizzas are okay. So yeah, just get that done with a simple message, which can be easily distributed.
Yeah, it doesn't always have to include the on the nose specific aspects. I also think there is a strong argument that threat intelligence isn't actionable, isn't intelligence, it's rumors. And if it means that you can get a message across, caution, that can prevent further crime, to use the same analogy again, that's useful, but it's going to take a bit more time. Think about that, the nature of the attack, and what's going off. WannaCry was devastating. As soon as people realized what it was and how to prevent it from spreading further, it was quite easy to put out the various bits of comms about, you need to establish blocks on these ports, you need to establish some local DNS entries for these URLs, and suddenly that kicked off the kill switch and it just stopped completely. Having that shared group of peers that you have trust with, and you can take a TLP from them on confidence, is an important thing at those times when it's uber urgent, and at other times we can tolerate a little more delay. And I think that's the bit where a discussion can help to inform that a lot. If the discussion has to go to we are seeing serious attacks, then think about how that's going to be coordinated and who that needs to be communicated to, whether that's NCSC, who are very helpful as some incredibly technical chaps over there who can support and have a lot of visibility, but may not be able to tell you as much as you would necessarily like, but they can still be aware of things and support in the background. If they don't tell you to not do a thing, you can generally do a thing.
So I'm just conscious of time. One of the things that Bruce and I like to ask our guests is what keeps you up at night? So I suppose in the in the field of incident response, I mean, do you have a common thread that tends to run through that wakes you up in a cold sweat?
Well, I could give you a LinkedIn answer that talks about some recent threat vector, but the truth is, 3 a.m. or so, my mind went to galvanic corrosion last night and thinking about galvanized steel and aluminium together as I tried to build a garden office. So, yeah, a sudden horror that I'm going to have to add in some additional pieces onto my build.
That wasn't quite what I was expecting.
Yeah, but I think that is the best answer so far.
Damn that A-level chemistry that's stuck in my mind at this point, but not at the actual exam. I think so. I did quite a bit of work with OWASP Manchester, and we had a meeting the other week where we had a couple of presenters who were talking about bug hunting and supply chain attacks. And they're big things. One was leveraging AI for good and using that to look at incoming libraries, pull requests, etc., and running it through an LLM to spot likely vulnerabilities and issues that were in there that had been added recently as recent commits to those repos. And through his own admission, it was one of his first bits of coding. It was a start-off project. It was a neat idea that was working quite effectively in spotting things. It struck me that, yeah, we have such long chains in terms of the software libraries now that are used and built upon and built upon and built upon. And it is that quote from Isaac Newton, if I have achieved more or seen further, it's because I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. And we have a lot to thank for some of the people who have written some of those libraries that are fundamental to how all computers work. That also leaves us vulnerable to people attacking those things, and we've seen a number of significant attacks. The Shai-Hulud has been the most recent, well-known one that have run through organizations who've pushed all the development processes left, developed DevSecOps and all these great things with Jenkins pipelines and nice little lights that come on when it passes all the build testing. But the speed of that means that we don't necessarily have the same visibility. We don't have the same stability. Something the engineering world has got is they take time over confirming and qualifying bolt or such to a standard. And I sort of wonder if we need to do something like that. A similar aspect on that other talk was a guy who's a bug hunter, and he was saying, very, very widely deployed bit of software, Microsoft Notepad, that the inclusion of some additional code to support Copilot in that resulted in a deep link vulnerability that could result in remote code execution. We have to be cautious about how vendors, supply chains, etc., are adding functionality, pace of those changes, and whether they've maintained the same security thinking in some of these instances. It's great to chase these things and introduce the functionality that people are going to use. And we need to get beyond Pandora's box is well and truly open. AI is here. We can't just stick our heads in the sand and think it's not going to change the way many of us work. We've got to get it out into the hands of enough people and democratized enough that people start to find the good ways to use it, which usually are a little slower than the bad ways. But that does keep me up at night at times, as well as galvanic corrosion.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting that. Well, look, Ben, thank you so much. It's been very, very insightful chat. I guess onwards and upwards to the next one. We will see you on the next podcast.
Thank
Cheers,
you for
everyone.
having me along.
No problem.
you.
Thank you.
Okay. Cheerio, everybody.
Cheers,
Thanks,
everyone.
Ben.
Across multiple roles, multiple employers. I've been
Last mile took you 34 minutes and 25 seconds. Heart rate is 81.
What's going on? Sorry, guys.
technology.